Hello and welcome to the Frank and Stan Chat. And we have a guest. Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
Hello, yeah. And my long-standing friend, well, my only friend now, isn't it, Stan?
Yeah. I don't know. I get the feeling I'm on the edge now. Slowly falling off the edge of this chat.
Well, welcome, Stan. I hear you've been in Wales this week.
Yeah, it's a new concept for me, wintering down. Trying to find out just how you leave your caravan when the season finishes.
Right.
And basically, you just pay somebody
to do
the same thing of everything with the caravan. Just pay somebody.
Oh, but Stan, when Stephen becomes the new Stan, that can be your new job, can't it? Wintering down all the caravans on the side.
Yeah. So so I've been in Wales, and what I like about it is you then get Welsh news and things on Twitter, which I think is brilliant. So I felt part of it.
Okay, well, Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself so that those people here who may not have heard of you know who you are and what you've done and how we know each other?
So I'm Stephen Tierney, and it's I used to have a proper job. So I was a head teacher for 14 years in Blackpool, and then I ran a small multi-academy trust in Blackpool for 6 years. And then with the deputy head before that, I was kind of 25 years in senior leadership in various kind of disadvantaged areas in the Northwest. And basically first met Frank through the Blackpool Opportunity Area, where I lead a couple of the significant projects, one around literacy, and I've just stopped leading it, but the other one was around continuum of provision for the kind of most needy, vulnerable students that we had within our schools.
And actually, Stephen, there is some good news on that literacy front, isn't there?
I mean, there's some great news. I mean, the stat that they pulled together was around 97% of pupils who had made expected or more than expected progress in literacy. And the cohort was Key Stage 3, so it's years 7, 8 and 9. And that's just fantastic. And a massive credit to the work that the schools did, because even when we went into lockdown, we were still having meetings with them and looking at the options, and they were sharing different ways that they were trying to maintain literacy. And I know literacy didn't take the hit nationally that maths and science did, but to maintain it for those pupils in terms of their progress is great. So really pleased about that.
Yeah, well done. Okay, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, because I was in Wales and because I was sitting in Beaumaris waiting probably 3 hours for a cup of coffee in a cafe, I was on the internet looking at the Welsh curriculum that have just been through the Senedd, I think, and looking at it with envious eyes, the way it's been put together, the way it's been built, the way it's introduced, the fact that it's areas of learning rather than subjects, and the fact that it has the word experience in it, so that there is something about planning your curriculum with a series of experiences for children, not just knowledge. So that's what caught my eye. I've done some more reading on it since, and I've yet to find anything big holes in it. I just think it's a very well put together document. And then I thought, I'm not sure I've read the English national curriculum in the same, so I'm not going to criticize that. I'm not sure I've read the English one to the same extent, but it was quite enlightening to see that areas of learning, experience, cross-curricular activity, all that is included in the basic curriculum requirements.
It is interesting the way that going back to the creation of the national curriculum, though, it was very much, and actually any revisions seem to have gone through subject associations. So they seem to be the big players, and that's where I think some of the difficulties we're having now with some of the Ofsted inspections as well.
Well, and Ofsted putting their oar in and sort of saying this is how geography should be at Key Stage 1, and it's more important than every other subject, and you should be able to, I was at a school this week talking about the curriculum being changed, and the head was saying that the children now know that this is a geography lesson and this is a science lesson. And I thought, why? Why does a key stage 1 pupil need to know that?
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing, though, and it kind of probably will come out a couple of times when we're chatting, is this failure to agree what curriculum is.
Yeah.
So when we talk about curriculum, it could mean like the Welsh example, where they're looking like at these experiences, or it could mean the English example, where it's very much gone subject-based, or it kind of could mean both, but it might mean different things at different times. So when we were chatting just before, Sam, I think you were saying kind of from a primary perspective, the way they put together it really sits well, and it works the way that primary schools have functioned, and they've functioned a long time around this. So there must be a good reason why. And then there is this formation of subjects, which are bodies of knowledge, which is partly linked into our examination systems in universities. But that's also a great perspective on curriculum as well. But the difficulty comes when you try and impose only one model, and you haven't involved teachers in it. Because I think, I'm going to say Howson, it might not have been, but it was a 1979 paper, and it's basically saying there's no curriculum development without professional development, and you've got to engage teachers within it. Otherwise, it's just kind of this document that comes at them that they can't kind of access or link to, because they haven't got the development to do it. So interesting.
Also, did I read that they're merging the English language and English literature examination into one examination? I heard that I think I read that yesterday on a Twitter feed, but actually, in a way, yesterday, I think you were in the Northeast on, was it Wednesday, Steve? Wednesday, yeah. But I was in the Northeast yesterday, and this sense of how the curriculum's evaluated, and who's evaluating it, and why they evaluate it, and what they're looking for, is really starting to hit home with some of the head teachers I met yesterday. It was really just feeling as though this is, I think you mentioned before, Steve, this is sort of like it's the wrong race on the wrong course.
That's right, because you were chatting, and you were saying some of the primary colleagues were saying that they could never, the hurdle's too high, they can't get over it. And I was kind of reflecting that actually, if we got them to a same place, which isn't in the middle of a pandemic, and sat down and chatted and really explored it, I think they would say, oh, actually, it isn't that the hurdle's too high, it's the wrong race course. So in other words, we're having a kind of a secondary perspective of curriculum imposed upon primary schools, and it is just the wrong race. And there's a reason I think primary schools function and operated like they do, in and around cultural literacy and the development in a more thematic way of a couple, and then subjects beginning to appear, and subject knowledge begin to be important. So it's an evolving, so you've got this kind of two-layer curriculum, whereas at the minute it pushes, and I can remember being at an RSA talk a few years ago, and somebody talking about their kind of, I don't know whether it's the early years or the nursery, and the children knew whether they're doing physics, chemistry or biology. And I'm just sat thinking, why? Why? Does it fall that neatly in kind of early years nursery kind of space? Because even when you put curriculum together to secondary, where some things might be, that's chemistry, that's biology, that's physics. I studied biochemistry as part of my degree in pharmacology, and so it really kind of cuts across some places as well.
Well, the way I looked at it when I was looking at this Welsh curriculum was that the Welsh curriculum seems to have been built on how children learn in the early years and move it upwards, whereas the English curriculum seems to be how we're going to test them at 16 and move that downwards. So that, it's a very simple way of looking at it, I know, but if we're saying to children at age 4 and 5, you're doing science now and you're doing geography now, I'm sure their brains work better if they're just enjoying and seeing what they're doing and learning. By learning, I don't mean remembering, I don't mean building up a massive memory of knowledge, I mean experiencing, learning, moving on, being able to transfer that learning to other things.
And being inquisitive, isn't it? It's being inquisitive, which is the lovely thing particularly about early years, where even when it's just building stuff, they're inquisitive as to how many bricks can you actually put on top of one another before it does fall over.
Well, an area of the curriculum as well is health and well-being in the Welsh curriculum.
Right. Wow.
I can see that as a subject for
Yeah.
our curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
not going to say everything about the Welsh curriculum is brilliant. I've not looked at it enough.
No.
But it was refreshing to see that one, practitioners were being involved in the construction of a curriculum, and that it was making sense to me as a mainly primary practitioner. It made sense.
Good. Stephen, what's caught your eye?
A couple of different things. Probably one we can look at quickly was MPQs becoming free to every school. I'm probably getting too cynical in my old age, but I wonder why that is. Because there's only a certain pot of money that's available, and suddenly it's becoming free. And so you start thinking, actually, is the uptake really that bad?
Really low, yeah.
And I wonder why. And just linking to what Stan was saying, I kind of had this phrase: if you want it in the classroom, you need it in the staff room first. And this thing about health and well-being for the children, I kind of look and think, and you need health and well-being for your teachers and your senior leaders. And so, you know, some of the, and this goes back to the chat that we had in before about up in the northeast and Wednesday. I tend to be a magnet for people who want to talk about Ofsted, partly because I chat about Ofsted so much, and they know they'll always get a sympathetic ear. But the experiences of school leaders and teachers, it's always been massively variable under Ofsted, and you will get that because it's human, which makes the high stakes nature of it madness. But there seems to be a new variability coming through now, partly driven by curriculum.
Yes.
So you've got this thing about primary and secondary and how the Ofsted framework fits or doesn't fit. And then also variability around sensitivity. So you've got some teams who seem to be really sensitive to the fact that, okay, talk to us about the pandemic, the impact, how you managed what you did, what the implications were, how you're dealing with them kind of conversation. And others that just seem to be pandemic deniers, as if they walk into schools and say, right, don't know anything about the pandemic, let's just go. And so the experiences of school leaders have taken a new variability. So it's the kind of the MPQs and my cynical side, and then just the conversations around the health and well-being of teachers, senior leaders, and the impact of the accountability framework on them with all the variability that we're seeing.
Well, yesterday, Chris Russell from Ofsted, who's responsible for the implementation, development and implementation now of this framework, spoke to the audience, and I was driving up to the conference, so I didn't hear it. But blimey, it didn't land well. And let's just say that I knew it didn't land. I knew it because when people walked in, they were very much they were very subdued. And when we did the panel session in the afternoon, it was quite a nifty little way of doing it. The questions from the audience, they had an account, so they loaded the questions up and they appeared on a big screen in front of the panel, so the audience couldn't see it, but we could see it. But every single question was about Ofsted, you know, and we couldn't really get away from it because it's what the audience wanted to talk about. And it really made me, there were two things I have to say, one I didn't say and one I did. One that I did say was, somebody said, well, I don't know how we change it. And I said, well, the way to change it is none of you inspect.
It's
I said to a challenge, why are you inspecting? And it was more around not, because I do think there's some value in having practitioners who inspect. But the issue was, are you seriously telling me that you are out of your school at the moment inspecting when your school is we're dealing with still the biggest pandemic in the last century, and you're off doing a few inspections? And actually the question then, and I didn't mention it at the time, was, why are we all here? The bigger question, why are you out of your school at the moment, coming to this conference, when actually there may well be primary practitioners whose staff are off, and really, head teacher, you should be in year 2 covering that class. So I didn't mention that because I thought it was rude to do so. I would probably get shot down and I would have lost all the goodwill. But these are questions I think that are at the heart of why are we doing it? What is Ofsted for? How sensitive is it to the needs of the school? The DFE also spoke last week, didn't they, about doing a deep dive into attendance? Yeah. I thought, well, what the bloody hell are the Ofsted inspectors doing? I mean, that shows you something here about the DFE has said to Ofsted, you just get on with your inspections, and we'll do the attendance bit. But actually I'm thinking, well, that's even increasing the burden. It says a lot about Ofsted, because in my day, that was the sort of stuff Ofsted would do.
Yeah,
but haven't the DfE got lots and lots of data about attendance over the last 2 years, because people have had to submit it on a weekly basis? So it's probably some data troll that's going to be used rather than asking schools about it.
Assuming that everyone's used the right code.
Yeah, well,
because there was something about X and I's being used in a very sort of flexible way. Stephen probably knows a bit more about that than I do in terms of what these codes mean, but actually people were debating what code have you used,
It kind of goes back, and I think part of the problem, I haven't heard Chris's speech or listened to it, so I deal with it as a general point, but I think the kind of the curriculum is coming home to roost, and a very narrow and particular perspective on curriculum that Ofsted have. But I think the other problem that they've got is that they're becoming not believable. And so some of it is actually, Chris might have delivered a very good talk, very coherent, in a very sensitive way, but people's experiences are so variable. It's like, I can hear what you're saying, but what you're doing, it just shouts more loudly, and it goes back. And this curriculum kind of framework was going to be brilliant for schools in disadvantaged areas. Now, many of us didn't believe it at the time, and lo and behold, 18 months later, well, it's not been that great for them. But then you've got some very clunky stuff. So HMCI talking about schools not focusing on education, but visiting. Some of us call that safeguarding, and there seemed to be no understanding whatsoever of that. And then the food parcels comment, which was just kind of just not thought through really well. Even if there was a sense, and the standard line is, people have not understood what HMCI said. No, they had. HMCI hadn't understood the implications because they haven't experienced what it is to work in the most disadvantaged communities, which gives you a perspective in.
Yes.
To it. And I think heads are in a difficult place, because I don't know whether you've picked up, Frank or Stan, this issue that before, when there was bubbles, your teacher absence and your pupil absence kind of correlated. They got ill together and went off together. But now without the bubbles, and with pupils largely staying in, as your teachers are going off, you've still got the same requirement for teachers, but you've got far fewer. And so, and they can't get the cover teachers and all the rest of it. I think heads and senior leaders are in quite a dark place at the minute that I'm chatting to, and finding it even more difficult than the bubbles.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, because as I said, COVID has hit our family. So our eldest daughter, who is a primary school teacher, her husband went down with it first. He's a primary head. And so she then had it. And of course, there's then the issue that the two adults are COVID positive, but the children are not. And so the children should go into school. That is what the regulations say. That my daughter has decided that is wrong, so has decided to keep those children off, and actually she's home educating them. But of course the work then, the school are sending work home, so the burden has become double, isn't it? Because we have this combination now of the teacher actually with the vast majority of the children in the class, but with these sort of 3 or 4 outliers. Out here, that the burden has become, I would have thought, pretty difficult to manage. So I think that, and I got a sense of this. I've had a sense of this with the work that I do, and also through my own children, that they're just frazzled. They have literally. We haven't even got to half term, but I think they've given their all, and that's the bit, isn't it, with HMCI? That's the bit with Ofsted. If the inspectors actually give you an impression, or through their actions, you get a sense that they really do understand this, And even if you then say, well, they really do understand it, and they want to be critical of something, you're more inclined to take it. But when the language and the actions are so far removed from an understanding of the situation, then when a criticism comes in, it's very, very difficult to take that.
It is, even where the criticism is fair, if you're in a place where schools feel that they've been forgotten, that the pandemic no longer exists, but they're managing it day to day, what could be at one moment a rational, yeah, actually that is something we need to work on, becomes a screaming, do you know how hard I work, how much I've given? Oh, yeah, forget this.
That's really interesting.
And that kind of emotional response.
Yeah, that's interesting, because actually just thinking about it, I hadn't thought about it in that way. It's triggered a thought. I'm the head teacher of a school that's really struggling, right? I mean, I've got staff off. I haven't got enough supply cover. I don't know what I'm doing, really. And then up rocks 3 head teachers, current practitioners, to inspect me. And I'm thinking, well, how come you can do it? And they're saying, aren't they, by being there, actually we're saying, well, we can do it. And actually think, well, no, it may well be there's a complete riot going on at your place, and you're so worried about letting Ofsted know that you can't commit to the inspection. They then query whether or not, well, why can't you do it? You know, actually, you know, I do think there's something about the power struggle that will exist at that first meeting between those who have found the time somehow to do it during the pandemic and those who feel as though, well, I don't feel capable of finding the time to do it.
Wouldn't it be great if what has turned into the CEF was an honest conversation, where a head teacher could say, yeah, we know that's down a bit, but we're on it. So, you know, just leave that to us, and we'll sort that one out, instead of any kind of drop from good or outstanding in the grade is likely to put your school at risk.
I think it's the double thing, because the other layer of angst that you've actually got is, to be an Ofsted inspector, you have to be in a good or outstanding school.
Yes.
So far more likely to be in an advantaged area.
Yeah.
And you're far less likely to be an Ofsted and far more likely to be inspected in your disadvantaged area. So there's almost a come and walk in my moccasins for a little bit, mate. And then you'll see what it's really like. But I think you're beginning to get to the core of it, Stan, with the grading. Because the issue isn't necessarily the process, though I think there's weaknesses in the process. It's the fact that the process doesn't support grading of 1 to 4. So in other words, if somebody came in and said, right, you know, Steve, we think, I know St. Mary's Rise Head, we think St. Mary's is a 2. We're going to write in the report that we're pretty confident it's somewhere between a 1 and a 3, and we're really pretty confident you're not inadequate. Then that's about it, which actually would be honest and truthful. And then it says to you, so you can't really grade, can you? Not in the way that we're doing. And I think that goes to the hub of it, which is why I say to the people inspecting the whole pause Ofsted was, you've got to stop enabling a flawed system. We need a regulator. That seems to me appropriate. The regulator needs to work within the boundaries of what they can reasonably do. And grading schools, it's now basically you're grading intakes, particularly at a secondary level. The correlation is so high, it's just madness. And we've got to get put in place a far better system, including things like looking at the over-reliance on inspection when it's the wrong tool. So one of my favourite bees in my bonnet is about the whole safeguarding. That's an audit issue. In the same way we do the financial audits, there should be external coming in almost on a termly basis saying, right, we've looked at policies and we've looked at these particular areas of safeguarding, and we can see that this is in place, this is a strength, but actually there's some weaknesses here. We'll be back next term and reporting that up to the governing body. In the same way we do with finances. So you've got this continual iterative process, because the ridiculous, everyone's invited, and then Ofsted inspect their own work. And having utterly failed to identify what was some really, I mean, they're really quite saddening and shocking accounts that were coming out.
Do you remember a few years ago when safeguarding became very important to Ofsted, and they were measuring the height of fences and checking whether gates had been locked? I remember having a discussion with an Ofsted inspector who was going to put the school into a category because the fence wasn't high enough. And I said, well, can you just tell me the regulation fence size for a school then? Well, no, I'm saying people could climb over it. People don't climb over it, and nobody's climbed over it. So, but if you're going to say it's not high enough, there needs to be a regulatory height at which schools can put a fence or not, because we're going to obviously complain about your inspection, and I want to know the detail. Funnily enough, it didn't come up after that again.
We had a school spent literally hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money putting up this massive fence around this field that they had, and the school and all the security, because Ofsted had decided that this was the major problem in safeguarding. And the head, you know, it was basically, what happens if somebody comes in with a machete and tries to attack? And he says, we had a far greater problem with sheep mowing down our children than anything else. You know, they were out in the wild. It is the danger of trying to use inspection for things that it's
I think, though, it's interesting, you know, when you look back, I mean, the languages, this school, special measures, the school requires special measures in order to provide what was then a satisfactory standard of education. Now, that level, special measures, is absolutely critical as to where Ofsted should focus its attention. You know, and actually we can all walk into, and all the schools I've walked in the last few years, I have not been in a special measures school. I've never felt as though that the school has not been sort of able to provide, didn't have the capacity or whatever to provide a satisfactory standard of education, because that inadequacy is so clear when you walk in that you see it straight away. And that's where that's really what the safeguard for me is around Ofsted. Whether it's, you know, if something is so bad that people haven't got the capability or the capacity to improve it, that's when you've got to make that clear. But at that beyond point, that, it's a mystery, really. A lot of it is down to, well, I quite like this head. I quite like this way, the way the school's organised. I quite like, you know, and I think it's got worse. The focus on the lack of attention to data, you know, means that it's a bit of an open book. You can, you know, I could go in and inspect and say, well, I like this, I don't like that, and whatever. It's not really supporting a broad and balanced curriculum. That's my judgment. You know, it's not pinned against anything in terms of outcomes.
But Frank, if somebody was in that position being requiring special measures, then you could do a proper full inspection. And from the full inspection, rather than it be you must, you will, you should, this is how we think you can get back on your feet again, and some real guidance about how the school should get back. Not a list of things that they're not doing well, but a list of activities they might do in order to get themselves back on the feet. And for the rest of schools, the schools that are good and currently outstanding, it should be that HMI walk round. And
it doesn't take long, does it, Stan?
No,
it doesn't take long. And I mean, all you're doing by extending inspection to 2-3 days, whatever you want to do, is actually just getting the evidence to make sure that if they push back, you've got it. But actually, you're making it's fairly easy. I'm talking here about schools that are in, you know, special measures. They're falling apart. You know, you can sense it, you can feel it when you walk around. I just haven't had that feeling, and I think the thing is for me is that colleagues yesterday at the conference were so agitated and concerned about this variability that actually the point that for me it's really restricting innovation. You know, if you feel so anxious about it, some major project, you're not going to head off knowing that you've got an Ofsted coming. You certainly are not going to do that.
The interesting thing, Frank, partly coming out of the literacy work I do in Blackpool, is kind of occasionally being contacted, oh, could you come and chat to us as a local authority about it? And I've had a couple of local authorities who've just kind of said, oh, we're just so inundated when we've gone back to schools, they're too busy to kind of do work on literacy. And it's kind of like, all right, we got ourselves into a really wrong place here.
Yes.
You know, kind of that core work that needs to be done in terms of pupils being able to read and to write, and elements of oracy as well pulled in. And that's, you wonder what impact on heads and retirement and senior leaders and teachers and retirement over the next couple of years. I think a few people are saying, well, I'm seeing the school through.
Yes, I've heard that.
Do the next inspection and then I'll go.
Yeah.
It used to be,
I wonder how,
and I'll start developing the curriculum once we've had our next inspection.
Yeah, I wonder how many, because that was the point for me. I decided I wasn't going through another Ofsted inspection, and because the pandemic is going on so long, whether they'll look and see, well, this could be years, and I can't wait, and I'm just going to go.
Well, I work with a school who've asked me to do some work with governors. It's an outstanding school. It's much better even now than it was when it became outstanding. But the head wants me to talk to the governors about how it might come out as good because the criteria has changed so much. But the school is actually, in my view, far better than it was when it was classed an outstanding school. And yet the head's jittery, saying, well, it probably come out good. So
well, I heard I only heard this yesterday, so I may be quoting off somebody else, but one of the panelists yesterday said that they'd heard that the chief inspector had said there are too many outstanding schools. Have you heard that? I've not heard her say that. But actually, just a little bit of background in terms of the term outstanding was something that we developed for the 2005 framework. And they were talking about excellent, very good, all this sort of stuff. And I said, well, it's something that's outstanding. It's something for me that I would travel 15 to 20 miles to see, so it's something that shines so brightly that it's not your everyday thing. And actually, that was when we trialed this on 150 schools around the country. The HMIs just wanted to throw outstanding out because they genuinely felt that whatever we had was not good enough to capture this work that was going on. So we lost it at that point when we did the launch of the pilots. We had too many outstandings, but the implementation of that framework was so close. We just had to let it go. Now, I think that's a reflection of the brilliant work that's going on in the schools, and also the weakness of the framework that we developed, that we were not able to articulate well enough and accurately enough what that outstanding means. So I think I'm probably to blame somewhere down the line on that.
But you think
I blame you, Frank, definitely.
You think about the generally outstanding work that schools have done in their local communities over the past 2 years, and just not captured in a framework. And that you look and you think, okay, there's issues here. And so you can kind of see new HMCI, new framework, and same old problems in some ways, unless they get to the real core of some of those issues around the high stakes nature of it and what inspection can and can't do well. And there's some things it can and there's some things it can't.
It's funny because just to finish off here, Stan, because we've got to the 33rd minute of our chat and I haven't got to what's caught my eye this week. But at that conference yesterday, I had the presentation to give around what does levelling up mean in education. And it boiled down to me and what the Northern Powerhouse Partnership's view of it all is. At the end of the day, this is about funding. This is about funding. And a number of colleagues spoke yesterday about, well, the Northern Powers Partnership, all it's about is HS2, isn't it? And we were in Newcastle and they were saying, well, we're not going to get anything, are we? And actually, Newcastle does get an improved line. So there's an upgrade to the line to Newcastle. But actually, I think they forget the bigger picture here. This is about once you've made that sort of investment, you've got to see a return on it. So, whether that's a railway line or whether that's improved buildings or whatever it is in the north, you then have got the focus on delivering something from that investment. So for me, it was around early years, skills. We went on to the loss of BTECs and T levels. I mean, I saw Bronwyn Jeffries yesterday. I saw her article and she mentioned, was it 1,300 students are studying T levels at the moment? We are well short. If they think that's a success and that's going to take the agenda forward, it won't. It was an accountability, and the way accountability is impinging on innovation and just basically trying stuff. Say funding and then devolution. So we've got to get to a situation where we get greater control held locally with more resources, so that there is actually sort of more opportunities to collaborate and cooperate together on a local agenda rather than it being sort of dumped on you by central government. So those were the 5 issues. There are probably many others, but that's, as I was talking, I thought I've got to come up with these 5, and I had them all there, but actually I hadn't pieced them together. So for me, those were the 5 issues.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting one, I don't know whether you need to wind this up, just tell me if you do, Stan, but it's kind of the funding one. As a head in Blackpool, if St Mary's, the school in Blackpool, had been in London, the difference in funding was 2.7 million per year. So a similar school. Now you've got to take account London waiting and things like that, but 2.7 million It's absolutely outrageous. But it's also, I mean, I'm fascinated what you say about the T levels, because there's a bit of a chicken and egg. Until the BTECs go, the T levels can't take off. But I'm not sure the T levels will take off even when the BTECs go.
No, because there's a different, I mean, I don't mean it's a different type of students going to go for those T levels than would go for some of the BTECs. Yeah,
and that's interesting, because this idea of difference, I think it links into social mobility, because a lot of our social mobility has been around, I think there's two ways. There's mimicry and there's making, I describe them as. One is you become part of the ruling elite. So we kind of go to university and we start walking around in green jackets and buy a Range Rover. So in other words, we kind of go through, yes. And unfortunately I went through and did a science degree. I should have done the classics and I would have been fine. So there's kind of that mimicry. You can see that through history. The other angle is the making part. And people keep saying, oh, we're going to be like Germany. We'll never be like Germany, because we see the making, the apprenticeship part, as a second best. Yes. But can I give you a third push in there? Yeah. There's something around social justice. And we are absolutely appalling at social justice in this country and have been throughout history. But the impact of universal credit cuts is going to be felt by certain students who are predominantly in certain schools. And that is an absolute nightmare. Yeah. And, you know, in terms of there's a kind of a number of families and children who are in such a depth of poverty, and we see it in various places. So I saw it through a Blackpool lens, that actual social mobility is not open to them. No. They need a far more compassionate community perspective, which gives them an economic uplift. Yeah, to allow them to compete. And I agree. I mean, I mentioned this yesterday. I'm a bit tired of hearing about the kid who went to some school somewhere and has now become a lawyer. That for me is not social. That's not what I see as social justice or social mobility. It's social mobility for one person, which they can then crow about. The thing for me is somebody who can actually contribute to the community positively, to whatever community that they choose to live in. And I would love it if people in Blackpool, young people in Blackpool, chose to stay in Blackpool because it was their choice, and that we'd given them an education that encouraged them to value their community and to work hard, whether that's a store manager or whether that's a car mechanic or whatever, who wants to stay in Blackpool and put something back into the town they love. You know, that for me is, there's you know, this thing about social mobility, it's always seen as it's got to be about a profession. It's about, you know, get to Oxford, get to Cambridge. It isn't that at all. That's the mimicry bit. Yes. It's the making bit, the apprenticeship dimension, you know, the manufacturing and the staying in community, because mobility in Blackpool is about getting out. Yes. And it's a disconnect from your community, which you see so many places. Stan? Just read you the 4 purposes of the Welsh. It just... Oh, this will I feel as though this is going to sum it up now, and I'll close after this. It's the aim of the curriculum for learners, to support learners to become ambitious, capable learners, ready to learn throughout their lives, enterprising, creative contributors, ready to play a full part in life and work, ethical, informed citizens of Wales and the world, and healthy, confident individuals ready to lead fulfilling lives as valued members of society. Those are the purposes. Well, I don't think there are many teachers that wouldn't buy into that. No. Amazing. Okay, well, Stan, it's as if we were scripted. Stephen, it's been fascinating. And I have to say, our guests make such a contribution to our chat. So our viewing figures go up simply because we have guests. If it was just Stan and I, these would end. But I don't know why Frank's surprised. I have to say, thank you so much for your time. And what's the latest book, Stephen? Hopefully it'll be loads of people's Christmas stockings about just before Christmas. It's called Leadership Being, Knowing, Doing. And it's based upon both practical wisdom and kind of a virtuous approach. So kind of that sense of purpose and ethical approach tied with knowledge and also tied with the experience of doing. That was key. So that's the latest one. Lovely. Well, thank you for your time. And thank you, Stan. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Lovely chatting. Yeah. Thanks, take care. Really good. Bye. Yeah. Have a good week, everybody. Bye.